Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Observable Flutter. My name is Craig Labenz, and I'm your host. And today, we're going to be picking up where we left off in the last episode, building an app with Serverpod. This is the cheapest Twitter clone you've ever seen, named Chirpy. Last week, to recap, where we previously saw our heroes, I was working on just the initial setup, didn't really get very far in actual implementation. I do not use Docker on my corp machine, so I had a little delay there as I explored how exactly Serverpod sets up a Docker, a Postgres image via Docker behind the scenes as I replicated that. Turns out it was really simple. You just had to know what to type, as is often the case with programming. And yeah, so today I'm excited to actually kind of do some real stuff. Let me, okay, great. Everything seems to be set up. So let's do the thing. Everyone remember, this is Observable Flutter. This is the Flutter community. Let's just be wonderful to each other. And I think that's about it. I think I don't have anything else. So here I have my code that I was working on last week, and it is right here. We have looking at a make file right now that I use to kind of launch and drive everything. And I've got the server running right now. Which I confirmed to set up both the Serverpod app, make sure that was connected, which is over here. Oh, come back. So we've got the Serverpod app connected. This is kind of your companion app as you develop. And then I've got my database connection as well. Where are you? Oh, there we go. Postico. This is what I use. We can see all these tables that we made. I think currently only the core Serverpod and Serverpod auth tables. But yeah, ready to add on. So let me launch the Thundersham says, is it really live or recorded? Well, here's your proof. It's live. Okay. I think there might have been some chat hiccup for a second, but we seem to be good to go now. Let's launch the app that we've got. I believe I also replaced the starter app that comes with Serverpod with the Very Good Ventures starter client, because I just, oh, whoops, I didn't want to do that. I enjoy their structure and all that kind of stuff. So I'm going to get a second terminal here, and then I should have make app. We'll launch that. Good morning, Victor. Are you excited to watch someone fumble through your beautiful project? All right, this is launching, and then we will be able to continue. Good question here. Is Serverpod using protobufs? It is not. It is using old-fashioned HTTP. There might be a WebSocket. Is there a WebSocket, Victor? I think I've asked you this question like 12 times. Well, this macOS app is taking a minute to cook. Whew. That is not off to a fast start on this. Anyway, whatever. Today is, here we go. All right, this is, oh yeah, we added auth last time. Great. But I'm actually not really going to play with auth very much today, because as the title card indicated, today is just about the data layer. I want to launch into this with an organized way to read and write data from the server. I do not want to sprinkle that kind of logic all around the app. One of my corest, biggest beliefs in programming in general is that if you think state management is hard, then you probably have a bunch of different layers in your app all squished into what you're calling state management. And the two biggest ones really to separate out are auth and just data access, generic reads and writes from your database. And if they're smeared through, whether you're using Serverpod or Block or any of them, nothing can save you from the complexity that ensues if all that other stuff is smeared through the classes that you write for whatever state management solution you use. So I'm going to try to have a clean data access layer here. A lot more good questions and answers. Yeah, we got REST, JSON, and WebSockets. WebSockets make sense. It would be wild to have real-time communication, which Serverpod does if you didn't use WebSockets, especially this day and age. And does it support CI/CD? And it comes with some scripts to ship to GCP. I think there's also AWS as well. Obviously, I'm personally partial to GCP, but some folks are using whatever cloud they're using. All right, it's time. Let's look at what we've got. So I'm going to set up, there's two parts that I want to do today. And I think I'm going to start in the server, and then we'll move into the client, and then, obviously go back and forth some. But in the server, I'm going to add like a posts table and just seed it with a few records. Remember, this is a very, very cheap Twitter client, so these will be the stand-in for tweets. And then I'm going to go to the front end and start reading and writing those, but it's going to be more involved than just calling the Serverpod endpoint. And it might seem like going around the block to get next door. And sometimes it is, the first time you do it, it is going around the block to get next door. But then once you have a nice pattern in place, all of a sudden it's just teleporting to get next door. And that is the goal. All right. Did I add any models last episode? That's the real question. So it's not, I could maybe deduce it from migrations. Where does this come again? Where do I put these? It's not config. It's not bin. It's not generated. Is it in the client folder entirely? Lib? No. What am I doing here? It's here. Where's the models folder? It's not web. That'd be madness. It's obviously not migrations. Oh, lib source models. I didn't see the source directory. Clicked on lib, thought it was empty. All right. So we start with the example model, and I am not going to use that, but I am going to, we'll make a new file in here, and we'll call it post. New file, post.spy.yaml. And I'm actually just going to get rid of the example one. No, that might cause other things. I'll worry about deleting that later. Okay, making a post model. So let's look at some documentation for that. Can you connect to any kind of database? Currently supports Postgres, which personally I consider the best choice. Obviously, if you don't want a relational database, then it's hard to call Postgres the best choice. But if you want a relational database, I don't think you can do better than Postgres. Personally, there's obviously the super fancy versions of Postgres out there that different cloud providers have. Google's is called Alloy DB, and they're built on top of Postgres. So it even sets you up if you want to go real fancy later. All right, working with models. Here we go. This is what we're going to remind ourselves how to do, even though we could have maybe deduced it from the example YAML file. So to start, you name the model that you're going to use, and then we're going to start defining some fields. And the structure here is obviously name of field and then some meta information about the field. And there is some other stuff we can do, like server only. I actually am going to use this particular field. This will create, not very hard to guess, models that only exist on the server. But I do really like the idea of having a separation between the model that exists on the client and is the kind of data transfer. Some people just, they're called DTOs, data transfer objects, because this is such a common thing. And then once you get to the server, you convert that into the, whatever you need to use to talk to your database, the actual ORM object. And again, this can feel like going around the block to get next door. And for V1 of your app, it can be just kind of painful. But eventually your database will migrate. You'll add these different abstractions. Features will come and go. And decoupling how your app thinks about data from how your server thinks about data can be really, really valuable. And I've explored a bit how to do this in Serverpod. So I have some experience up my sleeve, and I'm glad that Victor's here, because I think I'm going to have a few questions on whether or not I'm doing something the right way or if I'm overlooking an easier way. So yeah, here we go. And we can have, what is it? Oh, this is the name of a thing, but the fields can be server only. And so I think for some scenarios, you might be able to get away with not having a whole separate class. You just have some separate fields, but then you're only partially separating your front and back end. So there's trade-offs everywhere. All right, let's get into it. Our first thing here, actually, I'm going to just copy some of these values. So this is going to be a post. And one thing I've already been wondering, and I was thinking about earlier, is like, should my server side be called like my server side version of this model? Should it be called like post server or server post, or like post DB for like this talks to the database? And then I'll make another one that doesn't have this server only value, and it'll just be called post. And then, we just have to have conversion methods between the two. I don't know what I think is perfect there. I guess I'll call this a database post. Database post. Feels weird to prefix everything with that whole thing. So I'll just maybe try this. Post database. It is server only. And what is it going to have? Ideally, I would work on auth before this, because obviously posts will have to have some kind of author field. But there's migrations in Serverpod. You'll never land your schema on the first go. So I'm just going to skip the authorship angle for now. Maybe we'll have a string here that'll just show their username or something, like really terrible, not how relational databases should work. And then in a future auth related episode, can kind of hammer out that scheme and add, update this post field appropriately. But for now, yeah, maybe we'll just do author is a string. I think that's pretty good. And then we'll have the body, which is a string, and created at, which will be a date time. One nice thing is that Serverpod has a VS Code extension, which is actually providing some analysis on this. So if I were to say, another field equals a wrong data type, I think, oh no, there are ways that you can screw this up. Or maybe I don't have it installed. Maybe I'm just getting YAML syntax highlighting. Do I have the Serverpod extension installed? No. Oh, I think I had to reset all of my extensions. VS Code is being weird for me. There we go. Wow, this is way better. Victor's probably been clawing his eyes out this whole time. All right, we're getting some feedback on my rambling here. You can always decouple the client models at a later stage too, if things get messed up or if you want to change the server-side models. Yeah, indeed. Yeah. Hi, Wolf. Wolfen. I do. I have heard of Dart Frog and used it many times. Dart Frog, pretty good. But if you guys add an ORM, then we can talk. But don't add an ORM because that'll take you forever, and Serverpod's already doing it. So instead of adding an ORM to Dart Frog, can contribute to Serverpod. All right, what is this mad about now? Top level object in the class YAML file must be a map. Oh, because these probably need to be. What? No, they don't need to go in. That must have been some stale analysis or something from before I added the extension. I'm not sure why it was just mad at me there. All right, what else do we need for a post? It needs a body, it needs an author, and it needs a created time. I don't know if it actually needs anything else for now. I think I'm just going to go with this. Okay. Now, Victor, is your intention that the server only fields, so going immediately back to the docs here, is your extension or intention that scope server only should be sufficient for like a long time on the potential need to separate? I mean, obviously there's support for that, and then there isn't support for generating tightly coupled, which is normally a swear word, front and back end versions of each other. So I'm guessing that the answer seems to be yes. Like, this is the goal. So maybe the Serverpod way is to actually just use this. One thing that I want to do, though, and the reason I get excited about this is I don't like to expose my primary keys to the front end. So this is actually what I like to do. Add another field here, like UID string. And this will be actually a UUID in implementation, but it's just a unique ID. And then in a different file, because I believe you can only put one class in a given file. So in a different file, we'd have class, just regular old post. And this would not get server only. And this class will not have a primary key, which I forget how to do, but you can do it. Oh yeah, you have to have use custom serialization for that. That's what it is. Yeah, so we might generate that with freezed or something. But I don't like the idea of having my primary key that, of course, this class will have because it's just going to get a serial column in Postgres, that value being ever leaked out to the front end. But the front end does need to have some unique identifier to just get a very specific record. And so I'll normally do that in the past when I've made things pre-using Serverpod. So I kind of bring that preference into this and am curious to explore how, what it's like to make that happen. So I think I'm going to go with this. One person asked, oh, that's the Serverpod way, but I'm currently thrashing about that. I would just have a post class. If you need the post DB, you can remove the table from the post. I would just have a post class. If you need the post DB, you can remove the table from the post and add it to post DB. Okay, I see what you're saying. Is there a way to hide the primary key, Victor? If I could do that, then I would not feel a ton of need for immediately using two models, two different classes. Because let's see okay, so we've got the primary public key. Oh, so this is getting really close, but I want the actual primary key, server assigned auto increment, to be server only. If I can do that, I'd be very, very happy. Enum information. Yeah, so we get into this field scope there. Yeah, I thought there was some way to specify something about the primary key. I'm going to type, focus on the wrong thing. Here we go. Primary, serial, yeah. The T and C words? What words did I say? I don't know what I said. Davidon. Davidon? Yeah, title. You could do that, but tweets don't really have a title. You know, they're just bodies. So post is like the generic version of a tweet. Maybe database will tell us something about the primary key. I do think I saw something about that. Oh, non-persistent field. That's interesting. Those are probably like computed fields, data representation as a JSON column. That's good. And you get relations. Man, I thought I did see something about like specifying the primary key maybe it was just in the generated SQL files. Yeah, indexing will obviously want to, all right, I'm actually just going to do that right now. Am I sure I can do this? No, but I've got the creator here. So I'm hoping he's currently typing an answer and or thinking about what the answer might be. But I know I'm going to need some indices either way. So here is a good linting, right? It knows it. It's like, what are you talking about? There's no name field, but I want to index the UID, and this would be the post UID index. And then we can add another one that will be, and here it knows that I'm duplicating, post, probably author index, and that will go on author. All right. I'll skip the DB, I'll skip the different things for now, but I would love to hide the primary key from the front end. I think that's nice. So if you can't do that yet, Victor, consider it a feature request for me. Okay, we're just gonna have one model. Now the next thing we need to do is, okay, here we go. Yeah, can't do it. In most use cases, that isn't needed. That's true. It's just me being, it just bothers me for some reason. It's not objectively important. I just don't like the idea of somebody taking their session, right? And like crawling a database of, let's say you're building a product, you're building an app that like is a food calculator, right? A calorie calculator or something. And so you have all of this information about that maybe is pretty laborious to acquire. Maybe you've like worked really hard to get, I don't know, maybe food calorie information is publicly available and is easy to get. Pretend it's not. Pretend you have to work really hard to kind of get this, and you're proud of the accuracy of your data, and it's a thing that it's kind of your secret sauce in this new company, this new app you're making, and you release an app, and every authenticated user is allowed to make requests to the server and look up the information of food because they're maybe taking pictures of food. And so this is just a totally valid thing that they can do. But they reverse engineer kind of how this goes, and they just start crawling your API, checking like ID1, ID2, ID3, ID4, and trying to get all of the information that you have to not like scrape your website, but scrape your API. I'm talking to everyone right now, by the way, not just Victor. I'm explaining why I care about this. And you can throttle it, and you can try to account for this and whatnot, but like, even if you throttle it, it might just take longer for them to do that. But if your primary key is never revealed in any serialized data, and you actually use this UID, which is a UUID v4 in all likelihood. So that's just random noise, but it's indexed. So it's still efficient to look up, but if you know one, you can't guess the next one. And so this would prevent a devious user from scraping your API, right? Scraping your database and getting these like pseudo public tables that an authenticated user, a good faith user, can read at will, but you don't just want anyone completely essentially downloading. That is where this is coming from. All right, can't be done for now, so we're not worrying about it for now. And I will for now skip the hassle of 2 tables. So I think this puts us, and I guess we don't really need the UID if you can't hide the primary key because you wouldn't use that. So I think we're back to just having this table. And in the future, author will become a relation to a user table, but not today. Okay, this seems right to me. And I need to make a migration now. Do I have a thing for that in the make file? App build, app. So we have migrate and migration. Wonderful. Here we are. Make migration. Oh, true. Yeah. So the endpoint can just, that's true. That's true. All right, what's happening here? Okay, this is just a warning. I'll do that soon, but I doubt it's my problem. Oh, no changes detected. Do I have to register this new class somewhere? I wouldn't think so. What was my problem here? So I cd'd into the server file, make migration. Let's look at the docs for that. Serverpod comes with a thing, looking good. Oh, table, duh. If you don't put the table field, you are not making a database class. Okay, let's try again. Yeah, add table key. I do love, so before I was working on Flame things, and I was lucky enough to have Flame authors functionally sitting over my shoulder, looking over my shoulder by sitting in the chat. And boy, you know, once you code that way, it's hard to go back. All right, so here we go. Let's check this SQL, make sure it's looking good. Migration.sql, here we are. Knock this down a bit. We've got our value here, and we have our index, and we have record of this being inserted into the migrations table, which is how every migration system works. Looking great. Now, sometimes I'll edit this if I need to, but I don't think I need to this time. With migrations, sometimes you can need to, but we'll get to that down the line. Okay, now we need to run the migration, which I think I also have a command for. Migrate. That was right. Make migrate. Awesome. Pick up our database. Look here. Post. Great. I'm going to add some records because I'm not going to have a form to write that quickly. I mean, I could start with writing. I guess maybe we'll start with writing. I don't know. We'll see. All right. Oh, we need an endpoint. Nope, I'm not going to worry about an endpoint until I start getting ready for it from the front end. So it is, I will need to run Serverpod generate to add that model to the client so the front end can use it. So this would be, did I have one for that? Probably make generate. There we go. Make generate. I would look at the SQL code. A, you can learn some stuff about SQL, and B, for migrations, you can sometimes be surprised. We still need a sequential field as a primary key for performance reasons. Oh yeah, I don't not want to have a sequential key. Always have a sequential key. I just don't want the front end to see it. You can add indices for any column so that it's fast to look up non-sequential IDs. Yep. Yeah, so the difference between sequential and non-sequential IDs in this is more on writing than reading. Once the B tree is, which is the binary tree, is in place and decently balanced, then it doesn't matter what is in, what the binary tree is sorting. You knife through it really quickly and find what you want. Sequential values can be better on writes because it leads to more predictable impact on the balance of the binary tree, whereas the UUID can like just write all over the place and can cause painful imbalances in the thing. And it's like Postgres's job to manage that, and it's you can get PhDs on like how databases detect when a binary tree might be out of whack and how they efficiently you could slow down someone's web app if Postgres was just constantly checking whether or not the binary tree was still balanced. So it's a whole thing, but it's Postgres's job. You can either make its job either easier or harder. How to migrate if you're using a Hive database. I assume you do mean Hive and not live database. Hive is local host. Actually, I'm not sure what you mean. Can you restate that question? Okay, I have generated. So now in the client, we should see, I still only see example. This is the cost of, I didn't get rid of examples. I'm not surprised it didn't go away. Do you have more knowledge of post? No, post didn't make it to the client. What did I do wrong? Capability, working with endpoints, working with models. Do I have to add something to generate? Or there's a config. No, where's that one? This is important stuff, but it's not what I'm looking for now. Deploy, no, of course not. Generated. There's some place where you do have to add a custom migration. If you have a custom serialized file, you have to add, like, register it somewhere, but I don't remember where that is. Did generate work? It did. Generate code. What did I do wrong? Client. Server only? Oh my gosh, is that still in there? No way. It is. Chase, God bless you. All right, now in protocol, we should see some mention of post. There we go. And we have our post class. Wonderful. Wonderful. All right. On to the Flutter client we go. Okay. It is time. So we've got our app, counter, internationalization or localization, and login, and all these random files. All right, so this stuff is coming from the Very Good Ventures thing. So I'm going to add a new directory here called data. Really fancy. And I'm going to add a new file in it called data. And I'm going to export. No, I'm not going to export this anywhere. It's not a package. It's an app. Okay. You've probably heard of repositories. You've probably heard of data sources. You've probably heard of all these things. So not going to do a whole bunch that's radical or new today, but I am going to use all those things and try to apply patterns that I've used in the past to Serverpod, and we'll kick the tires together. So the first thing that I have used in the past is this idea of like a data contract, and then you have a repository and inner sources that all adhere to this data contract. So, oh man, it takes so long to write. I think I'm probably not going to do that. I think we have to be honest. I'm going to work on this project for 90 minutes a week, and a good data layer, you could spend weeks ironing out all of the kinks, and in fact probably should in a lot of cases. And that will just never get implemented here. So I'm going to have to cut corners probably. And that really is a painful thing for me. I'm one of those people who like tinkers and optimizes and basically just bike sheds on things forever and never actually launches software. So I'm going to try to force myself to actually write stuff that will run as opposed to optimizing backend systems and plumbing and whatnot. So wish me luck. New file, base repository class, repository.dart. And let's see what we can do here. I definitely want to have a generic repository that works on arbitrary fields. I don't think it should know much about those fields or like about the contents of its model other than the most bare bone things, like how do you look up a single record? How do you, which in our case is use the ID field, or maybe in this other scenario I've talked about, it's use the UID field. How do you serialize and deserialize them without knowing about each individual field? So we can have an abstract class repository that is going to have a generic, and that is going to extend the serializable entity, I believe it is called. Serializable entity. And that comes from Serverpod, and it is about to be renamed model. So in some future release, you will write this. But here we go. A repository. So we're going to need a few, at a minimum, we need like read a list, read a single, and write a single. We'll like need those three methods. But I'm going to start with reading. Oh no, we didn't seed the database. I was talking about starting with writing. All right, we'll start with writing. So we have a method, maybe save, and it's going to return a T. Actually, probably a future of T, huh? And it is, in the past when I've done this, I always like defer all of the work to, an inner local memory source and then a remote kind of API source. And that leads to the repository class basically having no logic in it. So I'm trying to think, if I know that I don't have the time in this project to do that, because I could work on it for the rest of the year and barely get done, how do I want to do this instead? Like I do want to have a repository kind of cache objects. So I can imagine having like a local cache. So this is probably going to be final local cache, and it's not to be read wantonly. So this will equal a map of, I guess, ints for primary keys to T. And so one of the first things that we need to do here is say, like, our local cache gets, and then we're going to actually take the object. Oh, right, but it doesn't have the T yet because we have to save it to the server. One thing I've worked on, or when I played with Serverpod before, is kind of seeing that these methods would need to be injected a little bit. So I might have like kind of two methods. There's an inner save method that you call, or there's a wrapping save method that you call, and then there might be another method that actually talks to Serverpod that a subclass would implement. So this might go something like await, and this will be async, write item or persist. Yeah, we'll call it persist. I'm not sure what to call it. Persist. And this is going to take the T item, and it will probably return a T. So this will be final, like saved item. And then we could put in our local cache saved item dot ID equals the saved item, and we return the saved item. And then there's another method, t persist, it returns a future of t, and it also takes an item. Now, one thing I forget, persist. How do you spell persist? Oh yeah, this is nonsense. And what's our ID here? Getter ID isn't defined for type T. Does serializable entity guarantee a T? No, it doesn't. It just guarantees these things. So I need to tell this that it's going to have is wondering if there's another layer to the class hierarchy that knows a class has this thing called a primary key sitting at .id. In serialization, what else do we got here? Persist probably can't be private because the subclass may live in a different folder and it'll need to see it to know to override it. If I made persist private, then all subclasses would have to be in this file. So only server side has that known concept of an ID. All right, so we can, how do we tell this that it's going to have an ID, that we're certain it will? We could potentially wrap our serializable entity with like some other class that provides the public interface that we want, but even that public interface would have to know that its inner thing will have an ID. So somewhere we will need I wonder if that wrapper just actually needs to be very flexible and not. Yeah, the wrapper may need to be class specific. So what we might have to do is create another abstract class called like model wrapper, I guess. And this won't have any generic typing because it can't, is my understanding. But it will have things like final, no, it'll be just like int get ID. And I don't know if this will need to be nullable because objects will start unsaved and they won't have an ID. I probably will need to do that. And then we can put anything else here that we know is universal. So like if we have if I was going to put this created at, oh goodness, missing the down arrow every time. If I was going to put like created at on every single model, then I could in theory reference that here. I don't think I'll really worry about it for now. I know it's going to also have a toJSON. So this will be a map of string to object that will be toJSON. And it will also have a from JSON that I can't really define here because abstract classes can't have static members or constructors. So this is, I think, the extent of our model wrapper. The repository may also need to accept a from JSON thing. So we might say like this dot from JSON, and we'll internally store another method. Yeah, it doesn't have to be private. That's fine. Final t from JSON, or no, function that takes a map of strings to objects. JSON from JSON. Okay, required. So now this is going to take a model wrapper instead. And the model wrapper, we know that the saved version is going to have an ID. That's the whole point of persist. So we can put the bang there, and this will kind of be our saved, our save method. I think that's reasonable. Data, we can export repository.dart. Oh, save. You take the item and the ID. Wait, what's the... But I don't have an ID yet. You're saying to put an ID here? That can't be what you mean. Because we don't have it yet. I love freeze. So modeling stuff after freeze, I think, is a great idea. I am curious about what you mean by this. Yeah, I'm not sure where the ID would go. But I await more info. Okay, so now let's add... I might move like a post repository somewhere else later, but for now, I'm just going to put it here. Posts repository. I guess maybe we'll go singular. I don't know. Post repository, posts repository. So the way this will work is we say class post repository extends repository, and then we have to give it the type. So we also have to add the class post wrapper extends, what did I call it? Model wrapper. And then we have to give it the stuff. Okay. So a post wrapper is going to take a post. And that is going to be a field, final post. And we have to import post from the client. And then the ID is going to come from the post.id. And toJSON is going to come from post.toJSON. Oh, right. No, we're not returning the function. We're calling the function. Okay. So post wrapper can be what this repository is of type of. And now we need to implement the one missing method, persist. And this will go to the client and use the endpoint that I have not written yet. Client, that would be in server, endpoints, new file, post, endpoint.dart. Look at that. Let's copy some code from example endpoint. Thank you. Thank you. And we'll replace example with post. And then I'll steal this. Oh yeah, the session. This is the key parameter in any Serverpod backend is this. You could think of it like the build context in the front end, but it's doing totally different things, of course. Basically talking to the database and probably your caching services and that kind of stuff. Also holds the authenticated user, all that kind of good shenanigans. Anyway, we are going to return, we have a method that's going to return a future of type post, and we'll call it save, and it's going to take a post, which is the item, but after the session, as we saw. Okay, and we have to import post from protocol and save. Before we can call generate, this code has to compile, at least I believe, and it doesn't compile yet. This is one thing I've seen, Victor, that is understandable, but could maybe go somewhere on the backlog. I believe this won't work, well, at least if my experience from Yeah. So there's an error that this return type is false. And so to even generate a stub, we have to say like return, post, or like we could even just say throw exception, right? This will at least not be a compile error. So now we can generate. And then this will add code again to client. This is what connects our front end to our back end. And so our protocol, I think this is where it goes, should now have a save. No, where's that? Client. Oh, endpoint post. Here we go. Save. Yeah. All right. So now we're good. And we can like interact with this on the front end and actually implement it later. But it does have to compile before we can generate against it. Okay. Closing some noisy stuff that's open. I'm going to come back to you, close protocol, close client, close serialization. Yeah, here we are. So, oh yeah, another thing, this, I'll probably have it take the client. So this is the kind of the God object. What's your problem? Has required parameters. The implicitly invoked unnamed constructor. What did I? Oh yeah, from JSON. That's right. That's right. And that was, okay, so super from JSON is going to be, well, that's just post from JSON. Oh, because that returns a post wrapper. That's not what I want. That's not what I want. Wait, what did I say? Oh, right. T for from JSON isn't actually correct anymore. So you, I wonder if this could work. Could this say, I don't know if this is going to work. The problem that I have right now is that from JSON is returning T, which is actually just a model wrapper. But what the repository needs to deal with is not the model wrapper, but the model. Like that's what from JSON returns, of course. It doesn't return a model wrapper. That would be interesting if, I wonder if it could. I wonder if it could like hydrate the model and then just wrap itself into model wrapper. That actually probably makes sense. Probably is what I should do. Okay, so this would be JSON, and we would say model wrapper. Oh no, this would be a post wrapper around the from JSON that takes this. What's our problem here? Two positional arguments for from JSON. Oh, the serialization manager. So this is a thing about about Serverpod, and I believe we can just pass the protocol. Is that not right? Oh, the protocol is like a singleton. I think we can do this. Yeah. Victor, tell me if I'm making you want to die. So let's back up and look at what's going on here, just for those following along at home. The from JSON method that Serverpod generates is called, well, it's called from JSON. That was not what I meant to say. It takes these two parameters, the data, super obvious, and then a serialization manager that obviously is where it delegates all the individual logic to, and this is how it will handle relationships, I imagine, when we get that far and all that good stuff. Anyway, you have to pass this in, but it's like, well, what the heck is a serialization manager? Turns out, it's from an implementation here. So this is something that has been generated for us. This is not just from raw Serverpod. And if we look at this serialization manager, it is abstract. And so that doesn't tell us what we want, but I remember from previous excitement poking around in this protocol because I wanted to see how that worked. And it happens to extend the serialization manager, and it is a singleton, which makes sense because I believe this is going to all be static. This would never have any state, right? It's just data in, data out, holds on to nothing. So a singleton makes perfect sense here. And so I believe that this is valid. I have no idea, Victor, if you intended anyone to write anything like this. Second parameter will be gone in Serverpod 2. Yeah, I guess that makes sense, right? Why take this in if it is stateless and a singleton? It can obviously be deduced internally. Actually, removing that second parameter will be really convenient. In some exploration on this before, I found some pretty significant friction around using custom serialization with freeze models that have generics because of this second parameter. So if you remove that, that'd be really wonderful. Yeah, I think freezed requires freezed and in that scenario, Serverpod each have different ideas about what the second parameter should be from JSON, and they just become incompatible unless I was missing something. But yeah, there we go. All right, we have our post repository. And it is, I think, looking good, but we still have to implement persist. And this is where we can now say client.post.save, and we pass it the item, and except it's like item.object. So item.post, I guess that's fine. Okay. I don't love this yet. Like there's my item wrapper or this post wrapper. I'm making this up as I go. There's probably smarter ways to do that. Anywho, this needs to be async, and then we need to return. Actually, I don't think it has to be async. Oh yeah, see, I'm getting into this whole headache again. I would have to turn it back into a post wrapper, and then I would have to await. So then it will have to be async again. All right, you said you're taking notes. I'm guessing that, some kind of way to eliminate such a thin but tedious layer is in Serverpod's future. Okay, I am now, I think, potentially ready to make a UI and call this. So let's try that. Maybe I'll save a commit here. By the way, I'm pushing all of this code to, oh no, where'd my banner go? How did I get do that? Why did I get removed? GitHub.com. There we go. So every stream, I'm going to push code to this repository. It is the cheapest Twitter clone you've ever seen. So don't get too excited. Here we have, I'm going to do the server side stuff first in its own commit. Server down to here. So this would be add post model and endpoint. And now we're just looking at our data stuff. So this will be add and adds beginning of data layer with post repository. Yeah, all right. Looking good. And sure, we'll push those. Now we can, I think, write some actual Flutter code. I bet you didn't see that coming. So let's look at our app. Here we go. This doesn't have any routing, I don't believe. How's the font size, by the way? Is it good or is it actually too big? I just made it a little bigger a minute ago. I'd be curious if anyone thinks the font is like too big and you'd like to read more, you'd like to see more of it, then that would, please let me know. Do you include generated code in your repo? I do, yes, absolutely. The build runner isn't very fast, especially if you have more stuff. And I would just always commit that code. The upside of that is when a new person checks out your repository, they, I've heard some build runner times, they get into that half-hour range or longer. So you don't want to guarantee that everybody who does anything with your app has to wait a half an hour for that. Oh, you might have been asking about the specific Serverpod generated code. Yeah, I would do that as well for all these same reasons. I don't know if Serverpod generation suffers from the same speed slowdowns because it doesn't use build runner, so it may not. It might be fast all the time. But you just don't force everybody to generate code all the time. And then a fear that folks have, which is not unfounded, is like, oh, we're going to have conflicts in that generated code if two different people change things. Sure, the only source of truth is the actual generation file. So like your freezed files or your endpoint file and your model YAML file for Serverpod. And at the moment you have any conflict in your generated code, you just blow it away and regenerate. That is, you were going to have to regenerate all the time if you didn't commit the generated code. So anyway, that's how I think about it. And yeah, you can do that in your CI. That makes sense, especially if it's faster. All right, we're going to need, I'm just going to go to a page. Yeah, we're not going to go to the login page anymore. We're going to go to the timeline page. Where am I? App. Here we go. New folder. Yeah, this will be a timeline feature, and it'll probably be embedded later in different locations. So new file here, timeline.dart. And this is going to, we'll stick with the VGV thing. That's why we're using it. So we'll call this view and new file timeline view .dart. They just went with app.dart, but I already have a timeline.dart for my barrel file. So I'm not gonna, we'll go timeline view. New file, view.dart. And then this one can export. All right, timeline view, here we go. This will be a state list widget to start. Can't think of any state I'm going to keep immediately. Well, that's not the only thing I wanted out of that. There we go. Timeline view. Yeah, timeline. Okay. Here we got a lot of stuff to do. Folks, I also only have about 20 to 25 more minutes today because I have a thing a little earlier in the morning that I want to get to. Another work-related thing. So we'll see how far we get. What structure is this going to have? I'm a little bit of a block fanboy myself. I enjoy that. So probably going to use block for state management. And it will take a repository. And yeah, let's do it. Timeline, new folder, block. And then this will also export block. That's good. There isn't an inner file yet, so that's why I was mad. All right. Pubspec of the Flutter file. Man, I want to hide these pubspec.locks. I wish that was default. Flutter, this one. Do we have block in here yet? I do. Good. Do we have Flutter block? I do. Good. Okay. So we got a class. This will be the timeline block. Extends block. And I always forget. Okay, it's the event first, then the state. Looking good. So this will be timeline event and then timeline state, which are two classes that need to exist. And then I think that block takes like this dot. No, we have to go super dot initial state. And I love freezed for both the events and the state. And I really, really love doing that. And I think you might as well once you see it. The only real downside of it is that build runner can be slow. Again, that pubspec. YAML for Flutter. Do we have freezed? Probably not. Okay, let's add that. So I'm going to add a dev dependency of build runner. Oh, that was already there, staring me right in the face. We'll add a dev dependency of freezed. And then I'll add a dev dependency of JSON serializable. I don't actually know if I'm going to need this, to be totally honest. Okay, I'm not adding it because I don't know if I'm going to need it. But we got freezed, and then we'll have to add the regular dependency. Add dependency of freezed annotation. And so that is now up here. Whoa, FastL Tech. Any good list of GitHub repositories to learn? So best practices around implementing push notifications, emailing, navigation, state management. So basically everything. Sounds like you are getting into Flutter pretty hard, which is great. And you're trying to tackle everything. Oh, no notification today. Interesting. I don't know. I'll try to find that out. Try to answer that question. Yeah, there's like, I'm just going to hide myself here. How do I do that again? Is it just this? Yeah, there's a GitHub Flutter, like awesome Flutter or something. Okay, there's a couple of these. So folks are maintaining a lot of different curated lists for stuff like that. Obviously, there's just a crazy amount here, which is very cool. I don't know what this one is. It doesn't look to just be a fork of the other one, but it looks to, it's also just got its own awesome list of Flutter stuff. So those are two that I would point you at. And I know there are more, but those are the ones that I remember off the top of my head. Good question. All right. So let's see here. All right, yeah. So added, freezed and stuff, looking good. Now we add freezed annotation, which alphabetically needs to go there. And then we can say freezed. Someone asked why I didn't use the VS Code plugin for block, and it's because it just do stuff a little differently. Because I like freezed for the event and the state. So class, timeline, event with timeline, event. So we got a basic thing here. We'll do the same thing for timeline state. And we need to now say part block.freeze.dart. All right, let's make these actually work a little bit. So our first thing here is probably going to be so const factory, the class name, and then I think this will just take we'll have it be save. It will take the event or the post. So this will be post, and we'll redirect this to the save post event subclass. We have to import post. And I suspect that is actually sufficient for this for now. State, I always handle a little differently. And I like what freeze does with events. I love what freeze does with block states. So I always have just one of the fancy freezed constructors, and it is unnamed for state. So we'll say const factory timeline state. And we redirect this to an underscore because we can just use this name. We don't care about the name of the implementation class. So this will be timeline state. And we just put all of our fields here. And there isn't more than one kind of state. We'll use copy with in the block when the state updates. And that's that. I got this from resocoder. I didn't make it up myself, but I really do like it. Shout out to resocoder. I don't know if he's still hitting Flutter stuff pretty hard, but really, really great content. So we're going to have basically just a list of posts that we're showing, I think, for now. Pretty easy peasy there. All right, let's generate this, which I will do by putting a thing in the make file. So build, I've already got it, just wonderful. All right, because I was using injectable last week. Great stuff. Make app build. That's why build runner was already there. That's right. Hey, need a session on Rive with Flutter. I'm using it for a project and notice that the build size suddenly jumps, wow, almost 4.5 times just by adding the package. Oh. Yeah, you may not be able to get around that. Have you checked their GitHub or like their, presumably this question has been asked and answered before. It is a good question. I don't know because I've not gone very deep with Rive. Certainly not deep enough to like look at the build size before and after adding it. But you can't be the only person who has wondered about that. All right, my state definition was slightly imperfect because I didn't say that this was required or add a default. And I think I'll add, I don't know, do I want to add a default or do I want to make it required? I feel like required is better. Okay, let's try to build again. Are you going to work? All right. Okay. Things are getting exciting now. The next thing that we need to do is actually have the block expose some functionality. So block now has the on method. And what you do for on is the original thought, the kind of conventional thing that you do with this method is call it once per type of event. And we only have one, so we'd only call it once regardless. Of course, we'll eventually have more like refresh and favorite and, delete or edit or whatever, right? Block this person, like all kinds of stuff, theoretically. And so then you would call on this magic method that comes from block every single time, once for every type of event. I love the map method on freezed classes and their kind of sealed union aspect. And so I like to call it just once. So on a generic timeline event of type that we have yet to figure out at all, then we pass the callback that it will invoke, and this takes the event and the emit function. So if you've not used block, this might just look like total gibberish. If you have, you've seen this a bunch. The event is, the block is basically wrapping a couple streams, an inbound and an outbound stream. So what we're saying is here, on an event, run this callback. And the callback is passed to the actual event that was just invoked. And it's, of course, of the type that we specified here. So all we know right now is that it's a timeline event. We don't yet know what kind. We don't know if it's a save post event, because in the future there will be others. And then emit, this is the method that we use to kick the state back to our app. So what I like to do is use the map method here and say event.map. And this gives us a required parameter for every single subtype of event that it could possibly be. And what I love about this is that when I add, refresh posts or just load posts, right? Whatever I'm going to add, I'll regenerate this class. I'll run build runner again. The map method on timeline event will be regenerated to have another required parameter. And this code up here will start to complain because it will say, hey, you didn't provide me a callback for load. And I will say, oh my gosh, you're right. Thank you. And that is just great. So this is ultimately a method that is going to just take the event, but it is now a save post event. So it's better typed. And maybe I'll call this E to not like conflict, because I want to call it event in here. And now we can actually do something. What will this do? Well, we need to have the repository, which I have hilariously not even added yet. So this dot repo. And oh yeah, that's right. I don't actually put initial state here. I'll come back to that. So final post repository. There we go. Repo. Looking good. So now in this save method, you can either put logic right here or farm it out to another method, which I think is actually the better call here. So let's have, we still need to bring in the event. I didn't mean to delete that. This is going to call a new method that will just be like save post. And we're going to pass it the event, and we have to pass emit as well. So now we can make a method down here. It'll be future void save post. And it's going to take the save post event, and it's going to take the emitter and now in save post, we can finally get around to saying repo.save event.post. And this is probably mad because of my wrapper situation. Okay, you're mad about that. Post can't be assigned to type post wrapper. I don't like this at all. I'm going to have to rethink while walking my dog. I'll ponder the philosophy of how to make this less annoying. Great. And the emit method we're not using yet, but I'm just going to leave it in, even though it's technically an unused parameter. Okay. Looking good. Catching up on chat real quick. So what about the other states? Loading, loaded, failed. Yeah, great question. Super good question. So loading is when posts is empty. Loaded is when posts is not empty. And failed is not handled as nicely there, but I definitely would have some kind of optional error object. So I haven't really figured this out yet. Maybe we'll just call it like a timeline error that doesn't really exist yet. And when something goes wrong, you can set that. Just to make the analysis thing happy. We'll have to rerun build runner, of course. But yeah, so kind of in one thing, everything just kind of remains nice and tight. The downside of this is eventually, we're going to have, load posts. and load posts, and it's going to get its other event, which is going to be like the load posts event. And we're going to call this like get or list or, whatever we end up calling it. We'll call it list. This method doesn't even exist yet, but then we're going to say final posts equals that, because that's what it's going to return. And then we'll eventually call emit, and this is going to be on state.copyWith, and our posts will go in there. That'll be fun. And we'll have to have some controls for things like remembering to remove an error if there was one. But you can get around that by adding dedicated methods to state that are like set posts or something, and then that just returns copy with and hides the fact that it's zeroing out the error, so you can't forget it. There's different ways to do that. Admittedly, no solution is ever totally perfect, and this is the downside of this solution. Like, you could successfully load the posts but forget to kick the error message off the screen if you don't zero it out. So worth keeping in mind before anyone falls too hard in love with this pattern that I just happen to like. But anyway, some of this code doesn't exist, like that list method and the load post event. So I'm just going to comment that out. I have to comment you out, and then I think we're good again. That was a really good question, though. That was super, super good question. Oh yeah, true. Yeah, right. Yeah, that's true. I was kind of hand waving around the fact that if there are no posts, it would just be loading forever, right? So you might have a flag that's like did load or something. And I wouldn't be bothered by anyone if they thought, well, that is now starting to not sound any better than what I already do, have multiple state classes. And it's like, okay, true. There's downsides to this. You kind of have these other flags to keep track of. But you either have a couple flags to keep track of or like 10 different substates for subclasses for your state. And they both offer some tedium that you'll have to think about. And we will think about that when we get to writing this load posts thing. All right, this is the block. I'm going to save this, where by save I mean commit. And I'm really light on time now because of my thing today. Adds, posts, post block. No, it's timeline block. That's what we'll call it, because that's what it is. I'm really, really light on time. I don't know if it really makes sense to even do anything else. Yeah, like setting up the UI in Flutter. No, I don't think that's going to work. I only have a couple minutes, which is a little sad, especially since I missed last week. I'm going to end, I'll just look at chat real quick here and respond to some stuff. Haven't gone into block too much yet, but it feels like a lot of boilerplate. Yeah, I think that is actually just true. And for some context here, and this is nothing I'm going to say is a value judgment or a statement at all about the other state management solutions in Flutter that have less boilerplate. So what I'm about to say does not disparage any other Flutter state management thing. Before I got into Flutter, I did a lot of web development and used Redux. And that, to my eye, is conceptually identical to block, right? If you've not used Redux, then like terms there will not mean much, but they have a thing called a reducer, which takes, it's designed after the reduce method on like a list, right? You've got map, I don't know, all the other ones. Reduce is one of them. And so Redux has this concept of a reducer, which takes in events and modifies the app state, and then somehow signals to the app to redraw. I forget how exactly that mechanic goes in the Redux world, but it's like oh, well, the block is the reducer and the event that comes in is the same in both. And the state that goes out is the same in both. And what I found with Redux, and this is like 12 years ago, what I found using that was the boilerplate was fairly painful, especially when you're starting out, because you have this really simple app and you see you just have to write so much code to like do very little. And it's kind of like, ah. But as my app grew and grew and grew and grew and grew, you're adding more features, you're adding more screens, you're adding more actions users can take. And that boilerplate is kind of continuing to expand as well. But what does not expand is the complexity. Obviously, it'll expand a little bit, but it really plateaus. And this pattern of, a reducer in Flutter, for some reason, we call it block, business logic component, could have been named anything. That pattern of events coming in, states going out, it being the thing that is responsible for figuring out what the event means, really does a great job toward capping the complexity and capping the side effects, removing side effects that you can get, that you can see in your app as the complexity grows and grows and grows. So if you have a really, really small app, you have all that boilerplate, you have all this structure, but you don't really get to derive any benefit from it because you didn't have any complexity anyway, because your app is very, very small. And I think this is probably a big hurdle that anyone considering getting into block faces, where your first experience with it is writing a ton of code to do very little. And what's not as apparent is what it is like 20 screens later, when everything is still feeling really, really clean, really, really clean. And again, I understand that the Riverpod, for example, absolutely delivers the same thing where your app stays clean. I just used Redux for a long time before discovering Flutter. And so this pattern of the events in, the states out, is just really, it just feels really natural to me. It feels really good. Last thought, to go back to, oh, hi everyone, here's StreamYard. To go back to the code. I said earlier that a big thing, I think, is that if you find state management to be super hard, what's probably happening is you are putting too many layers of your app into your state management classes, and neither block, nor Redux, nor MobX, nor provider, nor Riverpod, nor anything can save you because this method here is going to end up doing a lot. And once we get to loading, this method is going to do a lot, right? It's going to check the local cache. It's going to make a network request, well, the full cache loop, check cache. If it's a miss, make the read, save to the cache, finally return the stuff, right? The full standard caching operation is going to happen in this method. And it might check multiple sources. Maybe there's a memory source, maybe there's a Hive source for long-term persistence. And then it only then falls back to the API. And that is a lot of stuff. And if all of that logic appeared in this method, I would have a really terrible method on my hand, very hard to keep straight, very hard to feel confident that it works correctly. And suddenly state management is hard. And I think like, the library I'm using isn't helping me enough. I need a new library. Someone tell me what the right Flutter state management library is. And you should use one, I think, because they do offer some nice bumpers. They help you from making simple mistakes, right? You could just have the two streams that are underneath this block, but there's mistakes that you can make that the library already accounts for. So like, personally, I do like all the different libraries. I think folks should use one, but then you want to get as much stuff out of your state management as possible. And this isn't like new. I'm not, this isn't PhD computer science philosophy or anything, but that's how I feel about state management. They're very good, but you should find state management to be very easy, honestly, because your data layer should have a lot of complexity. Your auth layer should be hiding stuff about checking the user, logging them in, logging them out. The block should just have the easiest lookup in the world. Hey, who's the user? Give me the user. I don't know who they are. I don't care. I don't care how you know. Give me the user. And the auth whole system hides the complexity of that. Anyway, we'll get into that more. I got to run. I'm going to be late for my thing. Folks, I love you all. This has been great. And I'm hitting the wrong button. There we go. Have a wonderful week. I hope to be back next Thursday, and I'll see you all on the next one.